welcome to Trader Talk TV. I'm Lindsay Roundtree and today I am joined by Richard Ottoy from Sharethrough. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Lovely to have you here. And you're talking to us about SPO.
That's right.
So before we kick into that, let's find out, you're pretty much brand new at Sharethrough, just opened a London office and you are kind of the first employee there. Let's find out a bit more about your background and a bit more about Sharethrough.
Recently joined Sharethrough. Prior to Sharethrough, I was with OpenX for about 8 years. And Sharethrough is a leading SSP, so that means we work with publishers and app developers to help them monetize their content. We operate an omni-channel and omni-format marketplace, so that means we support all screens and all formats, so that's video, banners, native and CTV. We also have a human-centric approach to advertising, and I'll come on to what that means a little bit later on.
Brilliant. And so SPO, why are you here to talk about SPO today?
So SPO stands for Supply Path Optimization. As the industry has grown a lot over the last few years, it's become increasingly complex. And so we've been working closely with a lot of our buying partners to navigate that complexity and help them drive better outcomes for their advertising.
And so let's go back to basics, because SPO is a term that's become fairly mainstream. It's very well used and adopted. But there are still people out there that probably don't understand what the fundamentals of it are. So let's map out what SPO actually is.
So SPO is an initiative that's used by the various businesses on the buy side, so DSPs, agencies and brands. And because of that complexity within the ecosystem, because that complexity has created a certain amount of opacity, they're choosing to work with certain supply partners to then get a closer connection with the supply and a closer connection with their audiences, and also getting better control of their media costs.
Interesting. So why is SPO so important and so fundamental in the transparency of the supply path today?
Yeah, so I think to help everyone understand kind of how we got to where we are today, I think it would be useful to go back and talk about when header bidding was created. And actually to do that, we'll talk about how publishers used to monetize their content pre-header bidding. So let's say there is a web page here, and there's content loading on that web page, and there's an ad placement on that web page. As that web page is loading, there's a call that is made out to the publisher's ad server. And the publisher would sell their ad inventory either directly to brands, or they would use various supply side platforms, and the ad server would make the call out to those supply side platforms. Now the ad server is a decisioning engine, so it needs to be sort of told what decisions to make, who to call and when. So the SSPs that the publisher is working with they're integrated through a simple JavaScript tag. Let's say that this publisher is working with 3 SSP partners, 1, 2, and 3. The reality is they probably work with a lot more than that. Most publishers probably work with between 6 to 12 SSPs, maybe more, depending on their size.
Wow. But
we'll say that for this exercise, for this example, they're working with 3 SSPs. Now for the ad server to make the calls to the SSPs, when the ad server needs to make those decisions are purely based on price. So a price needs to be assigned to each of these SSPs within the ad server. And the way that the publisher would do that is it would look back at the past performance of each of those SSPs to determine an effective CPM. So that look back window could be anything. It could be a day, it could be a week, a month, whatever it might be. But let's say that each of these SSPs was sent 1 million requests. And then the publisher is going to look at how much revenue did each of those SSPs generate against those 1 million requests to determine the effective CPM.
Right.
So let's say that SSP 1 generated $1,000 against those 1 million requests, so they've got an effective CPM of $1. SSP 2 generated $750, so they've got an effective CPM of 75 cents. And then SSP 3 generated $500, so they've got an effective CPM of 50 cents.
Yeah.
So we now have a priority queue based on pricing. So as this web page is loading and the ad server is called, it knows which SSP to call first. So it's going to call this SSP 1 because that's got the best price against it, and a call is made out to that SSP. Now the SSP is connected to various demand side platforms.
Yes.
And in this example, we'll say that there's 3 DSPs connected to that SSP. Again, the reality is it's probably connected to, if it's a leading DSP, SSP, probably something in the region of 100 to 150 DSPs. Now, what the SSP is going to try and do is it's going to try and solicit bids out of the DSPs. It's going to try and find an eligible buyer for this ad opportunity.
Yep.
And if it can find an eligible buyer, that means a buyer that's willing to pay more than the minimum price that the publisher wants and meets ad quality settings, then it would serve the ad, would render the ad.
Right.
If it can't find an eligible buyer, then it will default back to the ad server. And now the ad server knows to call SSP2 because it's the next one in the queue, and the same thing would happen. This SSP would then be called, and of course all the SSPs have got exactly the same DSPs connected to it, and DSP3. And the same thing will happen. Either they will find an eligible buyer, render an ad, or they won't. It will default back to the ad server. Now, an important point to make in all of this is the ad server can only call one partner at a time.
Yeah.
It's only got the capability of calling one tag. It cannot call multiple partners simultaneously. So when this SSP is called, it is exclusive to this ad opportunity. Nobody else gets to see this apart from that SSP. So only one request is made to each of the DSPs. They're only seeing it once. Now, this ecosystem, as I say, pre-header bidding, maybe we'll put here pre-header bidding, was problematic for publishers. Firstly, managing all of their SSP partners, understanding their past performance to set this pricing was labour intensive.
Yeah.
But an even bigger problem for the publishers was they couldn't realise true value for every ad impression. Because these are historic prices, past performance for the SSP, just because this SSP has generated $1 historically, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be able to generate $1 for this impression. They may only generate 50 cents. An even bigger problem is SSP3 might be able to generate $4, but the publisher would never know because SSP3 was never called. So that was a big problem for the publisher. So header bidding was created. And let's say there's, again, a web page with an ad unit on it. Now, as this web page is loading, instead of the call from the page going out to the ad server, where the ad server would call the SSP, the publisher has now added their SSP partners to the page. So as that web page is loading, the calls are made out to those SSP partners. And again, the same thing will happen. SSP3. Each of these SSPs is connected to the same DSPs. Sorry, this is a lot to write out. And so on. Now this was great for the publisher because what's happening is all of their SSP partners are getting called simultaneously off the page. They've got everybody competing in real time for this ad opportunity.
Yeah.
Each of these SSPs is going to try and get the strongest price from the DSP, and then they're going to send that back into the publisher's ad server. And now the publisher's ad server runs the final auction to determine who has the strongest price and who wins the auction and serves the impression. This was great for publishers. Their revenue went up almost immediately.
Absolutely.
They don't have to manage all of this past performance with their SSPs. They've got a lot of competition against every single ad opportunity. Now, because of this new ecosystem, this started to create new dynamics, started to create problems for the SSPs, which then started to create problems for the DSPs and the buyers. So we'll talk a little bit about the problems that created for the SSPs first.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So what happened with the SSPs is because they're now being called from the page, they are seeing 100% of the publisher's supply. So the amount of supply they're now seeing in their marketplace has gone up significantly. That obviously adds cost.
Yes.
And their ability to win auctions and serve an impression has gone down because they're competing with all of their other SSP partners. And the SSPs, their business model is a rev share, so they're only making money if they win an auction, they serve an impression, they can then apply their fee against that CPM. So because there's now more competition for every impression, their win rate has gone down and their costs have gone up. So their ability to make money out of the same supply has become significantly harder. So, so the SSPs realised that they needed to get stronger prices into the publisher's ad server. With stronger prices meant they would be obviously more competitive. That would give them a better chance of winning and applying their rev share. So there's two things they did in order to be more competitive in the ad server. One is they moved to a first price auction within a very short period of time. In this ecosystem, 100% of programmatic trading happened on a second price auction. That meant if DSP2 here as an example bid $5 and DSP3 only bid $2, DSP2 would only pay a penny more than the next highest bidder. So they would pay $2 and a penny. Now, the great thing about a second price auction is it gave buyers real confidence to bid high. If there was a user that they really wanted, they could bid high to win that impression, knowing that they'd only pay a penny more than the next highest bidder. So now what's happened in this ecosystem and that move to first price is this DSP who wants that impression, who's bidding $5, that $5 is sent into the publisher's ad server. They're not conducting a second price auction. So those $5, that cost of media has now gone up significantly.
Yeah, more than doubled in the example you've given. Yep.
Right. So that was one thing. The next thing was the SSPs realised that they needed more liquidity in their marketplace.
Yeah.
If they had more liquidity, then that would drive more competition. They had a better chance of sending eligible prices into the ad server, and of course, with more competition, pushed the prices up. So again, there was stronger bids going into the ad server. But they already had all of the DSPs connected to them. So in order to create that extra liquidity, they supplemented their DSP demand with network demand and other exchanges. So let's say here we've got these 3 DSPs. And when this SSP is called, as this web page is loading, as well as calling these 3 DSPs, they're now also calling Network 1 and Network 2. And of course, where do the networks get their demand from?
Well,
the exact same.
Exactly. So it's all coming from the same
DSPs.
Yeah.
So that was fine for the SSPs, but this now started to create a real problem for the DSPs and the buyers. The cost of media has gone up because they're now paying more. There's more competition for it, which is obviously driving the cost of that up for the buyers. And they're now seeing significantly more supply, way more than the SSPs. This has gone up exponentially for them, which is obviously driving up the cost for them. And also, they're now starting to see duplicative supply, which means there's a chance, because they're bidding on this ad opportunity through multiple DSPs, they're potentially bidding against themselves, driving their own prices up. So this obviously became a real problem.
Yeah.
So SPO was essentially born, and they started to look at who do we need to partner with in order to navigate this and understand the most efficient path through to that audience.
Okay, so walk me through kind of the importance of SPO in the context of this is very, very complicated, and obviously,
Yeah.
you know, it's a good reminder actually of kind of how header bidding came about, and you know the move on from the classic waterfall through to header bidding and from second price auction into what became even more complex. And actually, there was never an opportunity for either for both the buy side and the sell side to really be able to operate effectively and cost effectively with each other. It was always favouring one or the other.
Yep.
So SPO has come along to try to improve that in some way. So talk to me about why kind of the direct demand and kind of why the better connection between the SSP and the DSP is important in this.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, obviously there's now a lot of supply that they're seeing, they're having to ingest to try and find those audiences. The cost of that has gone up.
Yeah.
In this previous ecosystem, as I mentioned, the DSPs only saw the request once.
Yes.
They're now seeing it multiple times. They don't need to be seeing all of the supply across all of their supply partners. They had to in this world.
Yeah.
Part of the value proposition that a DSP brought to a buyer was they were plugged into all the supply pools, so they would be able to find all of their audiences through that platform.
Yeah.
But now, because all of the SSPs are seeing the same supply, they don't necessarily need to be plugged into every single SSP.
Okay, that makes
so they
sense.
started to evaluate their SSP partners. Who do they need to work with? Who's got scale? Who's got the most direct connections with the supply? And then they're also providing them with things like transparency into cost, so fees that are being applied, data transparency, so what's the environment that they've bought and how much did it cost them, and then also tools to help sort of curate that inventory in terms of only listening to the traffic that they're interested in and excluding any bad content or invalid traffic. So they started to evaluate all of their partners and really sort of reduce that down to probably a handful, maybe 5 to 10 SSPs, whereas previously they were probably working with 70, maybe 100 different supply pools.
And how has that improved things? There must be challenges that come with that as well. What are those challenges?
So I think the main challenge is understanding performance.
Yeah.
So part of that evaluation process from the buyers is looking at their SSP partners in terms of, as I mentioned, the scale, who's got the highest percentage of direct connections with the publisher, who can provide them with the tools that they need. And they're also then looking at the cost of that supply. Typically, how much have they paid for it? How has that supply performed? But they're not evaluating how the same supply performs differently across the different SSPs.
Interesting.
The DSPs, in terms of the tools that the DSPs provide to the buyers, they can optimize across things like domain, app, device, geo, those kind of things. What they're not typically doing is optimizing across the different SSPs based on that performance.
Interesting. So how, I'm guessing that's where, like, what, you know, where Sharethrough comes in. Like, how can you actually help ensure that that's not happening, that DSPs are able to optimize by SSP as well as all the other factors they're looking at as well?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things we do. Firstly, we put a lot of focus into those direct connections with the publishers. Having that direct connection means we can remove any unnecessary intermediary or reseller between us and the publisher. That means the buyer's not having to pay for any unnecessary fees within that supply chain. But having that direct connection also is going to improve match rates, inventory quality controls and things like that. That ultimately is going to help campaign performance in the long run.
Right, interesting.
And then the second thing that we do is, as I mentioned at the start, we apply a human-centric approach to advertising.
You did mention that, yes.
So what that means is, over the last 9 years or so, we've been conducting a lot of research, neuroscientific research into human cognition, human preferences towards content and advertising. And what that research has taught us is that people are turning their attention away from banner ads and video ads, particularly if those ads are disruptive to that experience. Conversely, what the research has told us is that if the ads are less disruptive to that user experience, they're more likely to pay attention to the ads. So, for instance, we know that people have sort of banner blindness, but what we do know is that they scan headlines.
Yeah.
So if you can apply a headline to a banner ad, that's going to significantly improve the attention rate, which is then going to improve campaign performance.
Okay.
So, so what we've done as a result of that research is we've built our proprietary ad enhancement products. So we enhance every single creative that comes into our exchange. As I mentioned, we add headlines to banners. With video creatives, we know from the research that a high percentage of those video ads are muted. And if they're muted, that means it's going to struggle to really grab the attention of the user. So by adding dynamic captions to the videos, that helps with attention, really helps with comprehension of what that video ad is, and that's going to lead to better engagement and performance.
Makes a lot of sense.
And
also,
then
block off forced audio as well, which are the most annoying ads out there.
Right. And then most recently, this year, we've also now built a product where we can add QR codes to CTV creatives. So the So the research has told us that when people are sat in front of their televisions and then the ads start, typically that attention moves away from that screen. It's then generally going to their mobile because that's already in their hand. So by adding the QR creatives to the CTV ads, that brings the attention back to the screen. It also then obviously drives engagement with the creative. And for the first time, brands are now actually able to measure the performance of their CTV campaigns through that engagement. So that's starting to get a lot of interest already this year. And what this means for advertisers is, historically, if you're a brand that wants to appear on this webpage against this user, let's say you're Nestle and you've got a Kit Kat creative, that creative is built, it's not going to change. So it doesn't really matter whether you're running that creative and you're buying through SSP 1, 2 or 3, you're still going to deliver the same creative. But the same supply coming through the Sharethrough exchange is going to perform very differently because of those enhancements than the other SSPs.
Right, that makes sense. And it sounds like, actually, if you look at SPO in isolation, actually it's not the be-all end-all. It requires, you talked about human-centric, you talked about the other stuff Sharethrough are doing, you know, from the exchange perspective, actually it requires this additional point to be able to allow buyers to be able to optimise by SSP, to be able to look at things beyond the SSP and actually they're happening on the page and look at what's happening from a user perspective. So is there an argument to say that SPO, while it's, you know, is it going to be the kind of a mainstream tool for improving industry transparency, which has been a massive concern, or are there other things that need to happen to it as a generic tool for it to be really kind of fit for purpose?
The short answer is yes. SPO is here to stay. These SPO initiatives and these evaluations of partners is only going to continue. As the industry continues to grow and there's more complexity, those SPO efforts are only going to drive better transparency, which is, I think, better for the industry. And I think the next sort of natural evolution of that evaluation process is, as I mentioned, understanding how the same supply performs differently across the different SSPs. If a buyer is, say the brand is an automotive manufacturer and they've typically bought Auto Trader, how does Auto Trader as a website perform across the different SSP partners? And I think that's something that the buyers will start to evaluate. And then something else that I think we'll start to see sort of materialise over the next year or two is around sustainability. So I read a report somewhere that apparently the internet contributes around 3 to 4% of global emissions, which is a lot.
That is significant.
Yes. So more and more marketers are obviously paying attention to this, and they're wanting to make sure that their SPO partners, their supply path partners, are not only able to provide that transparency and efficiency through the supply chain, but they're also able to help with that sort of environmental sustainability.
And that's actually really important from a buyer perspective, because there's a lot of initiatives within brands and marketers that are looking exactly at kind of not just sustainability, but lots of different factors across ESG, diversity as well. So how can they ensure that they are buying through the right exchanges and actually buying, diversified media plans, for example. And there's a lot of that I'm hearing a lot about, and that makes it very interesting.
Yep.
So do you think that this is a great opportunity for brands to understand publishers better than they maybe have done before, and vice versa?
Yep, absolutely. A lot of this, obviously, sustainability effort is coming from the brands at the moment, but I know a lot of publishers are also looking at this, and no doubt a lot of the tech vendors are also looking at this. We're aiming to be carbon neutral within the near future, so we're definitely one that's looking at that as well.
Fantastic, that's really interesting, and there's a lot more from this to come, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Richard. It's been great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been Trader Talk TV, and we'll see you next time.